and you're then in power, and hey, you're a democratic, you're all of a sudden a Democrat. And that is what most African leaders who take power would now like to follow, that kind of model.
What explains the very high number of military coups that are taking place in Sub-Saharan Africa over the last 18 months? I posed this question to Martin Plaut, a journalist and veteran broadcaster with the BBC. He and I spoke in a recent episode of my podcast, Solutions with David Ansara. If you would like to watch the full discussion with Martin Plaut, you can do so by clicking on the link in the description below. Enjoy. All right, so Martin, earlier this year, we saw a successful coup in Burkina Faso, a failed coup in Guinea-Bissau, but then also previously there were two such incidents in Mali. So, I think perhaps this suggests something also about those citizens and their attitude towards democracy, particularly in the Malian case. There's been about 6 months of protests there against the government, and many people seem to be actually welcoming the military intervention. Just because of the broader insecurity there, which has characterized the broader Sahel region. So what do you think that suggests?
Well, you're absolutely right. And the problem is that there tends to be a sort of honeymoon period when coups take place. I remember being in one in Liberia, and it was one of several that happened. And when they happen, people are delighted because there's a bit of looting you can get into, and you think that the person who is oppressing you, you've got rid of him and you've got somebody else in. And there's a slight shift in the patronage system that exists in the country. But pretty soon people discover that nothing much has happened, and go back to square one. I mean, the problem is that you get vast differences in Africa. I mean, let's just take two neighbors that are pretty close. Nigeria, which has a massive country, very complicated north-south splits, ethnic splits, differentiations over language and differentiations over religion, but still, a vibrant democracy in many ways. And just, to its south, you have Equatorial Guinea, which has been run since 1979, I think it is, by the Nguema family, Obiang Nguema, and then Theodore Nguema. And I mean, this is just a mini place, 1.5 million people, who has been captured by a family, and they run it for their own benefit. And everyone else is frankly a slave. I mean, it has a slave history going back to the European period, but I mean, these people are actually enslaved by their own government. And the son, is a playboy. The Americans took huge quantities of money off, and I think it was a speedboat, a yacht, everything you can possibly imagine. These people are held captive by the government. It is not a government. This is a gangsterism that is okay. You take someone like Burkina Faso. I mean, they have struggled with different forms of democracy, and you had Sankara, who was seen as a very good guy, but then he was assassinated, and you go through all these changes of power. But does very much change for ordinary people? Probably not, and that is terribly, terribly sad. So in every place you have slightly different configurations, but essentially you have a small group of people at the top who hold on to the power, and the people at the bottom just don't have it.
Yeah, so I suppose one of the contextual factors is the geopolitics and the regional dynamics as well. So we've seen the Ghanaian president coming out and saying that these coups are a threat to the West African region and stability there. And the regional bloc, ECOWAS, seems to be rather helpless in, maybe there might be some rhetorical condemnation, but there's no real force behind that. I'm a bit skeptical of some of these regional kind of institutional arrangements. What is your view on their potential to kind of sway things either way?
Well, sometimes they can be useful. I mean, there have been during the terrible Liberian situation, which went, you remember, with Charles Taylor, went on for years, with huge effort and with a lot of assistance from the Americans, they did eventually, solve that. He was forced into exile and is now imprisoned for what he was doing. And that is, that was a success, but they're few and far between. And the real problem is that there's too much to be gained by worrying about your own situation, that to really invest too much in what's going on in your neighbors. And some of them are really insuperable. I mean, you take like a place like Guinea-Bissau, which was, has been really just turned into a narco state, which is run for the Colombian cartels. I mean, the head of the Navy was arrested on board a yacht with a ton of cocaine. I mean, you don't need to know too much about the country. And the current president, against whom there's also been apparently an attempted coup, but people say it wasn't really a coup. It was he actually staged it to get more sympathy and more support. So, I mean, what can you say about a country like that, where the real powers are actually in Latin America, and it's the money that talks, and not it has nothing to do with really what's going on the ground. And if anyone tries to block the Colombian cocaine traffickers, you can imagine what happens to them. But I mean, just to go back to your original question about coups, and just sort of where we started this discussion. I was in Kampala in 1986 when, shortly after Yoweri Museveni marched into Uganda, into the capital of Uganda, after an appalling system of corruption and death and murder under Obote and under Amin. I mean, vast numbers of people died. But what was it really all about? Well, first of all, what it really was about was that the Northerners who'd run the country since the end of colonialism and British rule had, for the last time, were losing power. They had run the army, and the people in the south and the center of the country had run the civil service. And frankly, the army had just taken over after independence and ran the place for them. And it was the people in the south and the center learning how to fight, and they fought and they took back the country. But the north has been absolutely, decimated as a result of that, and gets nothing. And if you remember the Lord's Resistance Army, which was the most murderous of the, sort of semi-evangelical terrorist groups who, cut off people's ears, lips, and God knows what, and were eventually vanquished with American help, and driven into Chad. I mean, that was the result. It was the despair of the North that came about. But if you look at coups, I mean, you could argue that Museveni came to power in a coup in 86. He then holds an election 10 years later. That's the model. So you have the coup. Everybody says that's terrible. You then have the election when you've got it ready, and you're then in power, and hey, you're a democratic, you're all of a sudden a Democrat. And that is what most African leaders who take power would now like to follow, that kind of model. Coup, gap, election, probably rigged. You're in power as a Democrat all of a sudden, and you can be at the top table. You're at the African Union, you're at the Commonwealth Summit, you're at the French, you receive the Elysee Palace, and what's not to like.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this commentary, you might want to check out the full interview with Martin Plaut. That's linked over here. And I'd also be grateful if you could subscribe to my other channel. That's linked over here. Also, a quick reminder that we at the CRA produce a weekly newsletter. So if you're interested in more commentary from us, do click on the link in the pinned comment below, as well as in the description. My name is David Ansara. This is the CRA. Until next time, take care.